Hello, everyone, friends and neighbors alike. Thank you for joining us today for the poem of the day on Tuesday, September the 23rd, 2025. I think we're now officially in fall. I believe yesterday was the first day of fall, so happy fall to everyone. And to those of you who celebrate and for whom today is a sacred day, happy Rosh Hashanah to you. We're going to continue this week reading through Elizabeth Bishop's Geography 3. The next poem in here continues some of the themes and ideas of the previous poems, but again, kind of takes them in a bit of a different direction. It's going to be another longer poem and another narrative poem, one that glimpses a human's encounter with nature in the way that nature has the ability to make us pause and make us stop and confront it, that it is kind of indifferent to our busy schedules and our commercial lives. The poem I'm referring to is The Moose. So here is The Moose by Elizabeth Bishop, 1977. For Grace Bulmer Bowers. From narrow provinces of fish and bread and tea, home of the long tides where the bay leaves the sea twice a day and takes the herrings long rides, where if the river enters or retreats in a wall of brown foam depends on if it meets the bay coming in, the bay not at home, where, silted red, sometimes the sun sets, facing a red sea, and others, veins the flats lavender, rich mud, and burning rivulets, on red gravelly roads, down rows of sugar maples, past clapboard farmhouses and neat clapboard churches, bleached, ridged as clamshells, past twin silver birches. Through late afternoon, a bus journeys west, the windshield flashing pink, pink glancing off of metal, brushing the dented flank of blue beat up enamel. Down hollows, up rises, and waits, patient, while a lone traveler gives kisses and embraces to 7 relatives, and a collie supervises. Goodbye to the elms, to the farm, to the dog. The bus starts. The light grows richer. The fog shifting, salty, thin, comes closing in. Its cold, round crystals form and slide and settle in the white hen's feathers, and gray glazed cabbages on the cabbage roses, and lupins like apostles. The sweet peas cling to their wet white string on the whitewashed fences. Bumblebees creep inside the foxgloves, and evening commences. One stop at Bass River, then the economies. Lower, middle, upper, 5 islands, 5 houses, where a woman shakes a tablecloth out after supper. A pale flickering, gone. The Tantramar marshes and the smell of salt hay. An iron bridge trembles, and a loose plank rattles, but it doesn't give way. On the left, a red light swims through the dark. A ship's port lantern. 2 rubber boots show, illuminated, solemn. A dog gives one bark. A woman climbs in with 2 market bags, brisk, freckled, elderly. A grand night. Yes, sir, all the way to Boston. She regards us amicably. Moonlight as we enter the New Brunswick woods, hairy, scratchy, splintery. Moonlight and mist caught in them like lamb's wool on bushes in a pasture. The passengers lie back. Snores, some long sighs. A dreamy divagation begins in the night. A gentle, auditory, slow hallucination. In the creakings and noises in old conversation, not concerning us but recognizable, somewhere, back on the bus, grandparents' voices, uninterruptedly talking, an eternity, names being mentioned, things cleared up finally, what he said, what she said, who got pensioned, deaths and sickness, the year he remarried, the year something happened. She died in childbirth. That was the son lost when the schooner was foundered. He took to drink. Yes, she went to the bad. When Amos began to pray, even in the store, and finally the family had to put him away. Yes, that peculiar affirmative. Yes. A sharp indrawn breath, half groan, half acceptance, that means, life's like that. We know it. also death. Talking the way they talked in the old feather bed, peacefully on and on, dim lamplight in the hall, down in the kitchen, the dog tucked in her shawl. Now, it's all right now, even to fall asleep, just as on all those nights. Suddenly the bus driver stops with a jolt, turns off his lights. A moose has come out of the impenetrable wood and stands there, looms rather, in the middle of the road. It approaches. It sniffs at the bus's hot hood, towering, antlerless, high as a church, homely as a house, or safe as houses. The man's voice assures us, perfectly harmless. Some of the passengers exclaim in whispers, childishly, softly, sure are big creatures. It's awful plain. Look, it's a she. Taking her time, she looks the bus over. Grand, otherworldly. Why? Why do we all feel, this sweet sensation of joy? Curious creatures, says our quiet driver, rolling his R's. Look at that, would you? Then he shifts gears for a moment longer. By craning backward, the moose can be seen on the moonlit macadam. Then there's a dim smell of moose, an acrid smell of gasoline. Wow. When I read that poem, whether to myself or aloud, I get goosebumps at the moment of encounter. I love about the pacing of this poem that, you know it's called The Moose. Obviously, you see that at the beginning. And yet she spends, let's see, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21 stanzas of 28 before we encounter this moose. And instead, what's described is, again, something that's rather ordinary. It's sort of a road trip poem, right? Getting up on a bus, seeing the river, the trees, bugs, people getting on, passing farmhouses, passing churches, people giving their goodbyes, such that the people are, anonymous, right? Hugging each other. The dog watches. We only really get one particular person, although again, not named, not really familiar, but the woman that climbs on and wishes them a grand night as she's going all the way to Boston. This lovely middle section that I think is so relatable anytime that you've been on long forms of public transportation. I've not taken a bus this long before, but I've taken, I've taken, like, ridden in vans with multiple people, or I've taken planes, and you listen, not intentionally, you're just kind of around people. And if you don't have anything that's really on your mind or occupying you at the moment, and if you're trying to fall asleep, nowadays everybody has their own headphones, but if you're trying to fall asleep, you just catch bits and snatches of people's conversations. And what you learn from those is, most of the time, other than being able to glean little bits of people's personalities and what they think about and how they feel about those things, is that we're all living pretty similar stories. Essentially, the things that people's conversations, their small talks, and tend to circle around are the things in here about deaths, sicknesses, who was born, what someone said, what someone else said, setting something right from a long time ago. Those kind of mundane, small talky things that seem common to us all. And then right in the middle of all of that is then when the interruption comes. So it's right in the middle of this kind of liminal state that the narrator is in between waking and sleeping, where they're catching just little bits of reality, but are also kind of in a dream world at the same time, that the moose appears, which I think is a very dramatic entrance for the narrator in that way, but also lends the whole aspect a kind of twilight and ethereal apparition. I do think the moose is literally there, but imagine encountering it kind of in this twilight state, Not just that the setting outside in nature is uncrowded and barren and quiet, but that you were just in this place between the real literal world and then a place where kind of anything can happen. And the moose comes out, and the driver tries not to bother the moose, turning the lights off and stopping the bus. And the way what's interesting to me is the way it's described first is merely what it does, right? It stands there, looms rather, so you get the narrator kind of revising oneself and trying to search for a better word than just stands. It approaches, it sniffs, and then in the next stanza we get the figurative language to describe it: towering, antlerless, high as a church, homely as a house. And the two things that excuse me, are the three things that the narrator compares it to are all buildings, human buildings, towers, churches, and houses. But they also, in the descriptions, descend from something that is more distant, abstract, foreign, a tower, to something like a house, which most people have and are familiar with then. And then as the people talk to one another, they again continue trying to familiarize this phenomenon of nature that likely they haven't encountered in such this way before. They're described as resorting to something childish in their whispers. These things people say that don't really add a whole lot to a conversation, like, sure are big creatures, right? There's something about standing in awe of nature that certain people can't really stay quiet with. There's perhaps something that's uncomfortable about it, that they feel a need to say something, and the something that they say is something that is really commonplace, like that isn't really offering anybody anything. And I don't mean that as a harsh criticism at all, but it is something else that I've noticed, that sometimes people just kind of need to fill that silence with something that's unloaded and rather tame that way. Disposable perhaps is a better word. And then you hear someone else, it's awful plain, look, it's a she. I guess they're gleaning that from the antlerless description that we had earlier. And the moose in response just takes her time. It says she looks the bus over, grand, otherworldly. And then we finally get the narrator's perspective on this, or the narrator's thought on this. Why do we all feel this sweet sensation of joy? And again, we get within the middle of that question kind of two revisions, if you will. We get the why, that repetition of why, which I think centralizes, focuses, and really draws the reader to a stop the way that the passengers on the bus are. And then we get the parenthetical after, why do we feel? And it says, we all feel. So it takes that question from the specificity of the people on the bus to talk about this as a commonly shared human experience of being in awe of nature. And Bishop never quite goes this heavy within this language, but it really makes me think almost romantically of encountering the divine, or I'm sorry, the sublime within nature, that causes a sweet sensation of joy, which I think is important to distinguish from happiness. That happiness could be something that is, important, but kind of temporary. You get a good grade on an assignment, you have a piece of chocolate. All of these things can make you happy, satisfied, contented. But joy is something that is much deeper affect. It is more fulfilling. It's more complex. I think you can be both joyful and sad at the same time. You can be joyful and in awe. It's an emotion that is, I think, a heightened state, but also something that is also in flux because it shares characteristics with other intense emotions. Joy is often associated with kind of religious gifts or religious virtues, although it does not have to be. And the sweet sensation of joy that she's experiencing here is, again, I think something spiritual. I think it was Paul Tillich maybe that referred to these as peak experiences. And a lot of people talk about having these experiences with nature that are really kind of beyond words, which is really interesting because this question is left unanswered. And it seems as though the poem itself can only merely raise the question, but can't really provide a description that places it within an adequate context that would transfer it to the reader. In other words, when you're reading this, you don't have the experience that she's describing, but hopefully you can recall or remember some sort of experience from that. It doesn't produce it, but it evokes it. And then they drive away, and the moose stays. But what's interesting is the last two things are the smell of moose and then an acrid smell of gasoline. And I can't help but think, given the poem we read yesterday, of the night city, and her focus there on the burning in the night city, that last image is meant to contrast the joy of the experience with pure nature with a reminder of the ways in which humans are treating nature and exploiting nature. And so that last lingering smell of gasoline is kind of that the human last word, or the human legacy, is going to be one of burning and exploitation and destruction. Nonetheless, I don't think that overpowers that profound image of silence in the face of the awe of absolute nature. I hope you've had an experience like that before. Maybe not with a moose, but maybe just with a vista somewhere in nature. It is truly profound, and it's not something I think that you can seek out. I think it's something that has to be kind of gifted to you spontaneously, and that's part of the treasure of it. Thank you for being with us again. We'll continue with Elizabeth Bishop tomorrow, and in the meantime, I wish you all peace.